and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Wednesday the 4th of November. Joining me on this edition, our assistant editor, Steve Withers.
I've never woken up in handcuffs before.
Yeah, right. News editor, Mark Hodgkinson.
Meat or potatoes.
And audio reviewer, Ed Selley.
And when the dead walk, the living will fill these coffins.
Hello, and welcome back to the AVForums podcast. Before we go any further, do you feel lucky? Do you, punk? You could win some competitions, Mark.
Yes, you can. You better hurry up with the first one. It's the NVIDIA Shield Android TV, and that one closes on the 6th of November, so 2 days after this one goes out. Is that right? 3, 4? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hurry up with that, and it's well worth winning.
Did you have to get your fingers out there to count that?
Yes. No, I just nodded my head forwards twice. I didn't actually use my fingers, just nodded the head. And then we've got Waterworld on Blu-ray, which is available to active members and closes on the 9th of November. And also only available to... Oh, no, sorry. I'll take it back. It's all members, this one, and it's the Lady Killers Blu-ray, and that's the 27th of November.
Any winners?
No.
No, not yet.
None.
It's a zero-sum game.
So that's competitions. If you're feeling lucky, off you go, try and win some. And we should, if this one closes on the 6th, then we should have somebody winning something next week that we can announce on the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Exciting news. Let's move on. Hardware news. And Sky are about to make a big announcement. They haven't quite done it yet. They sent out an email inviting press along to their offices because they're going to unveil something. What is it, Mark?
Well, yes, as you say, it's an announcement of an announcement for an event that's taking place later in November. I think it's the 18th of November, was it?
Yes, that's right.
I believe you're going along. Is that right, Steve?
I am indeed.
Good. So we do know it's a hardware announcement, but it's not. But there's also strong speculation that there's something else afoot, as in regards the whole user experience. So possibly something akin to what Apple are trying with their TV and various other set-top boxes, are trying to achieve a more integrated 21st century content discovery experience. That's a bit of speculation on our behalf. There's no clues as to the hardware at all. We've got to take a guess that it's going to be Ultra HD.
Well, if it's not, then they're kind of letting BT get a march on things, aren't they? If it doesn't have
very much
4K.
so. So you presume we're going to get that news. We're going to get some content announcements, 4K content announcements, and see what they've got there lined up besides sports, because sports is a given. You've got to presume there's going to be movies and documentaries as well, but maybe they'll have a channel too. Who knows? The rest is just pure speculation. We just don't know how they're going to deliver it, if they're going to deliver it, early next year. Is it going to be through the dish, or is this going to be some sort of hybrid IP satellite receiver machine? That's kind of where my money would go. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, so much is
Wouldn't
unknown.
That count as an interim stage for Sky that they would probably want to try and avoid? I mean, their USP obviously is sort of satellite delivery. So surely one of the reasons they might have been delayed up until this point is that they'd be pushing to actually get 4K down via conventional for their.
They can do it, Ed, but they just can't get a lot down at once. So I think that's the issue. I think IP is a simpler. I mean, as BT have said, it's a much simpler way of doing it.
But you still need massive pipes.
You still need a fair size pipe. Yeah, you will. You will indeed. So
Sky offer a broadband service, right? So they can tie it in with that as well. In the same
they
way.
do.
Using BT Sport as a way of driving their own broadband service to a certain extent.
Exactly what I was thinking. Why they might pursue the IP route.
I think the other big thing here, again speculation, but it'd be nice if they did it, would be to do away with the multi-room cost that's there to have multiple Sky in multiple rooms, and have this feature on the new box where it does that via Wi-Fi or an app or some other way to other rooms.
Nice.
That might possibly start to make sense for people who have maybe left Sky in the recent past because of the cost, because of the expense, to actually reconsider it again, if they can get advantages like that for no extra outlay.
Yeah,
I definitely think that they're well overdue for a whole interface upgrade, aren't they? I mean, I don't have Sky myself, but whenever I've seen a Sky box, it's basically the same kind of interface as the box I had way back in 1999.
They've updated it a little bit, haven't they?
Yeah, but it's still kind of like the same, isn't it?
Yeah, but the thing I used to like about Sky was the simplicity of the use of the menus and stuff. It was simple for people to use without getting overcomplicated. So the test I always use is, can my mum work it? Basically, you know what I mean. And they had Sky for a long time, and used it, not a problem, and could find the HD channels and all the rest of it. So that was the one thing I did like about Sky. I mean, the only thing I didn't like about Sky was the compression that they started introducing to movies. So I got rid of movies pretty early on because of the compression and the artifacts. And then that started to move across to other channels. Now, as they try to pack more in, they're using more and more compression, and things start to look pretty nasty, which was another reason I got rid of it. And the final reason I got rid of it was the cost. When you compare it to the media boxes and streaming services and other things, catch up where you can catch up on what you want to watch and so on, and Now TV where you're paying £7 for the entertainment package, or you could buy the sports on a one-off if you really want that. That made more sense to me than sticking with Sky. So they have to do something, because I won't be the only one that's quit recently. No. So they have to do something to try and pull in more, because you read the results and it's always, we've added so many subscribers. What they don't tell you is how many people have actually left the service. Yeah. And I guess that'll be a couple 100,000, I would imagine.
My guess is that it'll all be there. They'll have Now TV alongside the Sky Plus stuff, alongside Sky Store, all on one box to give you the choice. So I think, I think it should be something good.
And of course, we're sending our biggest Sky proponent along to this event.
As long as he goes in his "I Love Rupert Murdoch" t-shirt.
Yeah, it might be an ambush, Steve. You never know.
Yeah, it could be. I just think Sky's going to have to up their game, because at the moment, like Ed's just said, their USP is they're a satellite delivery service, and I think there's a whole generation of people coming through now who don't have a satellite dish, don't have a Skybox, aren't interested in that, and that's not how they access content. So, either they adapt or die.
Well, they've historically been quite good at that, so we'll just see how we get on.
You went to see BT a couple of weeks ago now, Steve.
Yeah.
It was more than a couple of weeks ago. It was beginning of last month, wasn't it? And you've seen what they're doing and how much money they're ploughing. And they're not being silly, and they're not spending silly amounts of money, but
not at all, no.
They are making an investment in technology as well as the broadcast side, which is something that Sky was always famous for. But I think, as they made more and more money, they got. I think it's accurate to say that perhaps they got a bit greedy, and they've sort of, the innovation is kind of, certainly in the public eye, disappeared. And that was the one thing that they were always famous for. They were always famous for updating their cameras to the latest technology, updating the channels to the latest technology. They were the first to market with 3D and all the rest of it. It's kind of gone by the wayside, and BT's stolen a march on them with this.
Yeah, not just in that aspect of technology as well. Also they're gunning for them in terms of their sport coverage, which has always been the big thing about Sky. I mean, I think the majority of people who've got Sky generally get it for watching sport. I mean, maybe movies for some people.
I've got it because I don't have a television aerial on my house.
Well, that's another reason why you might get it. So, nowadays, if you want to watch, programming on Sky, like, Sky Atlantic or something like that, you might as well just get Now TV. It's cheaper and easier, and doesn't involve putting a dish on the roof and that kind of stuff. But if you still want to watch sport, then that's the way to go. So BT have made no secret of the fact, BT Sport made no secret of the fact that that's what they're going for. They're gunning for Sky. You could tell that from everything they're doing and the service they're providing and the way it's designed. And I mean, again, like going back to what I said about their box, the old Sky boxes. I mean, the BT interface is much slicker, much more 21st century than something that is still really knocking on the door of 15, 16 years ago, over that even in some aspects. So, yeah, I think they've seen what BT are doing, and they need to pull the finger out. I'm assuming they'll make an announcement later this month, but it won't be until next year that they're actually going to launch this service. So they'll already given BT a good 6 months head start. So yeah, they need to get a move on.
It is only a small market, to be fair, though. I wonder if they're going to launch possibly launch a Sky Sports dedicated service, a bit like Now TV, and offer you the option to. Because you say most people want Sky for the sports, really, but if they would rather not pay such a vast amount of money to have all the rest of the channels. So I wonder if they're going to start offering, sort of apping it out a bit more, so having a Sky Sports Now TV up separate to everything else, where you could pay a monthly subscription to see it all. Because just separate it out of Now TV. I don't know. Just thinking out loud. But they need to do something, and I think that would be a good way of attracting some customers. It would attract me for a start. I would pay just for the Sky Sports.
Of course, if they do announce an Ultra HD channel, and that's the future for them, formats standards still up in the air, Steve, and it's one of those awkward times at the minute. If your TV breaks and you need to buy a TV, then you need to buy a TV. But if you're holding out for the latest technology, I guess our message this year has been, it probably wouldn't be too bad if you waited another 12 months, 18 months, just to see which way the market goes. And that kind of led on to a feature which you published over the weekend, which was 10 features that your next TV really must have for it to be future-proofed.
Yeah. I mean, there's one of the reasons for putting it up now, I think, is because sales go in spikes, don't they? There's usually a spike around about between now and Christmas when this year's models get discounted, and then there's another spike in sort of March, April time of next year when the new models get launched. And as you've said, Phil, we've been saying most of this year, if you don't need to get a new TV, if you can last a bit longer, then don't. Obviously, if you have to, then buy one. Because we are going through a period of change, and you just alluded to that with regards to broadcasting. The standards for 4K broadcasting have yet to be agreed. They have not been agreed yet. It's pure speculation on our part. What we think we got a rough idea what we think it'll be, but it hasn't been agreed yet. Blu-ray has, but broadcast hasn't. So any TV you buy at the moment, you can't guarantee that television is going to be 100% future-proof. However, if it has these features that we've listed in the article, then there's a pretty good chance it will be future-proof, because it covers most of the things that we know about and the things that are coming down the line. So, for example, well, obviously, you need to get an Ultra HD 4K panel for a start, a TV that supports that resolution. And I think next year, certainly in any decent-sized screen, so above, say, 40 inches, you're going to be hard put to find many full HD TVs anyway. I think the majority of TVs next year are going to be Ultra HD. It's going to be the norm, effectively. But that's not enough. That's not as we've mentioned many times before, the manufacturers and the studios and broadcasters have realised that it isn't just about higher resolution. You need to give people more than that to make it a more distinctive experience from just full HD. So along with Ultra HD 4K, we also got high dynamic range. That's been talked about a lot this year. We've started to see it being released, so it's included in the specs for Blu-ray, for 4K Blu-ray. I know that BT were talking about doing it. They've done some testing. Apparently they broadcast the America's Cup with BBC and HDR. The BBC have been doing testing with HDR. A lot of TVs have been launched this year that support HDR, or they're going to support HDR with a firmware update. So that's coming as well. It hasn't been more the case of the higher end TVs so far, but we're going to see that filter down through a lot more TVs next year as their brightness increases and as it becomes more of a standard feature. But if you want to get the full benefit of Ultra HD 4K going forward, then HDR is also something you need to look for on your TV. It's a little bit confusing. There's another article which Mark originally wrote about HDR that covers all the different formats that are around. Some are supported by certain things, others aren't. So it's a little bit confusing at the moment. And we're hopefully going to get a much clearer picture at CES when we should get...
no pun intended there.
No pun intended. Announcements from the Ultra HD Alliance talking about their certification program. So their idea is, to tell you which TVs can do what, which I think would be very good. We'll also get more news from the BDA, and we might get some more news from broadcasters. But we should get a clearer picture, at least, of where things are going in 2016, which would be good. But so far, you want Ultra HD 4K and HDR support. Wider color space. Up until now, everything we watched and Blu-rays, DVDs, TV, etc., that's all used Rec 709 as a color space. That is the industry standard as it stands, but that is going to change. Again, it's all about giving you a better picture overall, so a wider color space, and probably it will be DCI because that's what movies use, and so it makes sense to just port that across. But certainly, you want if you can, you want your TV to have a wider color space. Now, up until now, I think Mark can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I haven't tested a TV, and I don't think you have either, that actually hits 100% of DCI. No, I mean, the closest I've seen is the Sony X94C. They got about 98%. That was pretty close. And some of the Samsungs are in the 90s, and also Pannies. So that they are getting closer, but they haven't quite hit it. But basically, the idea is that you want a TV that can hit DCI, because that's probably the color space that's going to get used. Now, going forward...
Hang on, before we go any further, because I think we need to give some context to this as well. We're talking about 90%, 98% and all the rest of it. It wasn't too long ago that HD TVs struggled to reach Rec 709, and even NTSC, which was Rec 601, which was an even smaller triangle. And that's why, if you look back at some of the marketing from a few years ago, you would have seen manufacturers saying, oh, this set gets to 98% of NTSC, or this one gets to 90% of Rec 709. So just to put it in the context, it wasn't that long ago that TVs couldn't hit 709, even though that standard's been around for about 20 years.
And the reason that they've suddenly jumped up this year, particularly in terms of the wider colour space, is because of quantum dot. The introduction of quantum dot on LCD panels means that they can hit a much wider colour space, and they're now getting very close to DCI. Although luckily, even if your TV doesn't hit 100% of DCI, and it probably won't just yet, or even if it doesn't have full HDR capabilities, there is an intention to include what's called tone mapping within the content in order to map the content as effectively as possible to the capabilities of your TV. So even if you haven't got everything on this list yet, you should still get some benefits from the content going forward. So it's always not lost. And
the content has to be backwards compatible, or it doesn't get signed off. So again, don't panic. Yeah,
absolutely. We've also got 10-bit, so we're going to be moving from 8-bit to 10-bit video, giving you greater detail, but more gradations in terms of the colors. So that's an improvement as well. I think the majority of TVs, certainly the higher end TVs that we've reviewed this year, with the notable exception of Panasonic, have been 10-bit panels. So that's probably going to become the norm next year. I thought pretty much all there will be 10-bit panels next year. But certainly the majority we've seen this year have been anyway. That's something we want to look out for. Is it a 10-bit or an 8-bit panel?
Yeah, and you're not going to get any higher than 10-bit, so don't go looking for anything higher than 10-bit. And there's a very good reason why the specifications at this moment in time specify 10-bit as the maximum bit depth. And that's because anything higher than that at the moment takes up a hell of a lot of space, and there's no actual benefit to it in terms of visibly seeing a difference. That's the reason why we're sticking with 10-bit for the foreseeable future. Because of the bandwidth, it would need to go higher than that, and really visibly, with the images that you're talking about and at the image sizes you're talking about, there's not a big visible jump that would make that worthwhile. So 10-bit will be staying for a while.
Yeah, I think 10-bit is more than sufficient for a television screen. And if you go to the cinema, they use 12-bit, but obviously they're dealing with much larger screen sizes. So I think we've mentioned this before in previous podcasts, but we're looking at a series of standards now that are really taking video quality in the home to a level that's almost on a par with what you're getting at the cinema, which is great news and for any enthusiast.
And this is sometimes why we started pulling our hair out a little bit. And it's no fault of forum members, because it's easy to get excited. People talk about things in the here and now. So when you're talking about Rec 2020 and all the rest of it, people are demanding that I won't buy another TV until it's Rec 2020. Well,
see you in 10 years, boys.
Exactly. I think expectations are just a little bit too high, especially when you take, like you say, Steve, when you take into account where we were just 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a little longer, maybe 4 years ago, where TVs were struggling to hit 709.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about with 2020 is a massive colour gamut. And if you think of how many millions, well, in fact, it's billions of permutations that you would need to get every single colour mapped properly to that standard, you're talking decade at least before that becomes a viable consumer format. Now, you might get the odd film here and there, the odd experiment, like you mentioned with the laser projector,
Jungle
Steve.
Book. There's a talk about the Jungle Book being...
But these are experiments, and I think expectation levels need to be lowered a little bit here. Those are experiments, and when you're talking about a consumer product that people on the forums are going to be able to buy, Rec 2020 is just not going to be doable. And I think the jump from 709 to DCI is such that people are really going to notice that. And there's no real need at this moment in time for us to be rushing to 2020, because it's just such a huge task to get there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't get there at some point, but I think you've got to at least look at a decade before. And again, I'll point out consumer product.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not even on the horizon in terms of professional products at the moment, is it? 2020.
No, but that'll come faster than it will for the consumer.
Yeah, it will happen eventually, but not anytime soon.
No. So yeah, don't worry about that. When you're looking at this list and you're thinking, well, why is it not 2020 and why is the TVs next year not 2020? They're not going to be. And any that claim that they are getting there, they won't be.
I have seen TVs, I'm sure you guys can say the same, that I've seen TVs that have had Rec 2020 settings, or what do they call it, Rec 2020 emulation or something like that? Emulation. They're nowhere near Rec 2020. No. Nowhere near it. So nothing gets, I mean, even DCI, when you look at the, there's on the HDR article, there is a graph showing Rec 2020 DCI and Rec 709. You can see just how much bigger Rec 2020 is compared to DCI even.
Yeah, and then just
getting to DCI.
And just think about that in terms of data. How much data points?
The processing the TV would need to map everything correctly would be phenomenal.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't blame people for getting excited about new technology, because we get excited about new technology. We talk about it all the time. But yes, expectation levels, I think sometimes we let ourselves get ahead of ourselves. Sometimes. Don't we, Ed?
I mean, there is the consideration that regardless of what the industry is doing, the general public's willingness to update to new standards, facilities and hardware happens at an almost fixed rate. So if we are about to essentially, if you like, sign off on and get ready for, what becomes a normal 4K sort of purchasing requirement, any move that's overly quick to anything beyond that it risks alienating and essentially just not gaining any traction at all.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at the marketplace in the last 12 months. The one buzzword that was around was 4K. A little bit longer than 12 months ago, maybe 18 months ago, it was just 4K that we were talking about. You're now looking at 4K, HDR, wider colour gamut. A general member of the public is not going to know what the hell you're talking about.
Yes, it's going to need to be bundled in such a way as, does it tick boxes that mean it meets standards that you don't care about and don't necessarily want defined? It just means, are you going to continue to get the X Factor in whatever format it is broadcast? Well, actually, I should be saying Antiques Roadshow, shouldn't I? Did you see that?
No.
Last night, Antiques Roadshow, more viewers than X Factor, so that's the future. So whatever they're
excellent,
whatever they're broadcasting Fiona Bruce in a couple of that's when it boils down to it, that's what people care about. They just want it to work and it to work reliably, and to you not to own a several £1,000 white elephant.
Yeah,
if you push too fast, push too quickly, you are absolutely arseholed. I've never watched a full episode of the X Factor, but I watch Antiques Roadshow all the time. I love it. Especially just now, obviously, HD's been very good for the Antiques Roadshow, and 4K probably even better, because you can just see more of the person's involuntary facial expressions, whether they know that you can just tell that it's worth much, much less than they thought it was. They had visions of buying a house in the Bahamas, and it's actually worth £9.50. And it's a prime candidate for the highest viewing standards imaginable. And I think it should be a technology showcase. That and Country File.
Anyway, getting back to 10 features that your TV must have.
Antiques Roadshow number 8.
I mean, Phil and I have seen demos. You're going to be getting 4K, HDR, DCI, and 10-bit. That's going to look, trust me, it's going to look awesome. So don't worry about that.
You don't need 2020 or anything like that just yet.
It's going to look awesome, trust me.
Totally.
So we've got this great, this fantastic quality content coming. The question becomes, how do you get it to your TV? And that's where HDMI comes into it. And at the moment, they're only on the higher end televisions, but what you really want, ideally, particularly when you're looking at TVs next year, is an HDMI 2.0A input. Most of the 4K TVs, certainly the mid to higher range TVs, they use HDMI 2.0. You can get some with HDMI 1.4 because it can still pass 4K, but HDMI 2.0 really should be the minimum, and HDMI 2.0A means it can also pass metadata, which is what delivers the HDR. So obviously there's no point in having 2.0A input on a TV that doesn't support HDR, but if it does support HDR, then it needs to have that, otherwise you're limited to only being able to get HDR via streaming services using the built-in apps for things like Netflix or Amazon Instant. So another thing you need to look out for is what kind of HDMI input is the TV you're thinking of buying? What kind of input has it got? Not always the easiest thing to find out, I have to say, that the manufacturers are often very vague when it comes to what HDMI inputs they're using.
Some of them don't know.
Yeah, some don't know. They very rarely tell you.
The other important point here, Steve, is that people don't need to panic about cables. As long as you've got a high-speed HDMI cable and they are plentiful and you don't have to spend a fortune on them, the cables are fine. You don't have to change the cables at the minute. All we're talking about is metadata and some firmware updates that manufacturers should do to the TVs.
Yes, exactly. I mean, obviously, in our reviews, we always try and identify exactly which kind of HDMI input there is by either looking in the manuals or testing, or usually asking the manufacturers. We don't always know themselves.
But we've got a nice little toy coming along, which should help us even further.
Yes. And it was mentioned in the feedback thread, and it's a great idea, which is basically having a table, a checklist of whether these TVs have got these 10 particular features. So if it's HDMI 2.0A, we'll identify it as such. Now, there was a second aspect to this, it's connected to, but not directly related with HDMI, which is HDCP, which is high bandwidth digital content protection, which has been around for some time now, but there's a new version, HDCP 2.2, basically developed because the previous one had been cracked. And things like 4K Blu-ray and probably the broadcasters going forward and other sources will use HDCP 2.2 copy protection. So you need to make sure that your HDMI inputs, or at least one of them, can handle HDCP 2.2. Otherwise, you won't be able to watch your brand new 4K Blu-ray player.
And what about if they're putting the signal through an AVR, Steve? You
want to make sure that your AVR can also support. Now, actually, this is an interesting point, because if you're going to buy an AVR, this is a slight tangent, but if you're thinking of buying an AVR, a lot of the same things apply here. You really want an AVR that's got, can support, again, HDMI 2.0A and HDCP 2.2, so that you can pass all this content through to your TV or projector. And they are starting to come, certainly all the new models that are coming out around about now, towards the end of this year, that's been added. So, but it is worth checking out, because I know a couple of guys actually who've struggled with their older amplifiers, older receivers, because they didn't support things like HDCP 2.2.
Well, that was my next question. I'm buying this TV. Am I going to have to go and buy another AVR if I get a 4K Blu-ray player?
It will depend to a certain extent on what kind of outputs, HDMI outputs, are on devices. If they have two outputs, which is what happened in the early days of 3D, for example, quite often saw Blu-ray players with two outputs because not all AVRs could pass 3D. So if there's two outputs, then you could put one to the TV and one to the receiver if it didn't support things like HDCP 2.2. It's a bit of there's going to be some confusion out here, definitely over the next 6 months to a year, because there will be legacy products that won't support some of these things. And you probably won't have thought of it because you're thinking, well, that's nothing to do with that's a receiver, that's the sound thing. But obviously it's also passing a video signal. So these things need to be thought of. And so, whether it's an AVR, a TV or a projector, HDMI 2.0A and HDCP 2.2 support would be ideal.
So basically these are the two things that people really should be looking for when they're looking at the next TV. Without a doubt, if it's HDR ready, 2.08, and it really has to have HDCP 2.2 if you want to have any future proofing when it comes to content being plugged into the TV. It has to accept that as the lowest minimum. And of course these things are fluid, Steve, and they change all the time, and I'm even hearing a rumour that come CES we might even be looking at HDMI 2.1.
Yeah, well, I mean, HDMI has a long history of gradual incremental increases in performance. I'm not quite sure what HDMI 2.1 would add that HDMI 2.0A doesn't already do, but like we just said, things like broadcasting are still being agreed. So I think HDMI 2.0 does up to, frame rate, 50, 60 hertz?
Yeah.
So HDMI 2.1,
you're going to have to assume that that's 100 to 120.
Yeah, 100 and 120, yeah, which could well be the broadcast standard. Again, we don't know yet, but that's been discussed. So, because for things like football, for example, or fast-moving sport, the higher the frame rate, if it's 100 or 120 hertz, you get bit better motion handling. So,
as a side note, I'm probably not going to like that because I think I think you have to have some motion blur in whatever you do. I mean, you wave your hand in front of your face, there's blur there. It's not crisp and clear, and Anyway, that's an argument for another day.
I don't mind that with football or something. I'm a bit more concerned when I hear things like
You
James
don't
Cameron's going to
watch
shoot
football.
Avatar in 60 hertz. That's a bit worrying. Don't like the sound of that at all. Anyway, so that's connection-wise. Now, just because your TV, even if your TV doesn't have HDCP 2.2, it doesn't mean to say you can't enjoy 4K content, because there's still, and currently, with the exception of BT Sport, the only way you're going to get 4K content at the moment is via some of the streaming services, specifically Netflix, Amazon Instant, and YouTube. So in the case of the first two, HEVC decoding is also important. That's high efficiency video coding, or H.265, which was introduced probably about 18 months ago, and is being used for encoding things like Blu-rays and most of the 4K content. Basically, it's more efficient. You can cram more information, larger files into a smaller space. So that's important too. If it's got HEVC decoding, they can probably handle things like, other sources as well, but most importantly, internet video providers like Netflix and Amazon Instant, who are currently the main sources of 4K content, which is number 8 on the on the list. So 4K streaming services, smart TV, I think that's becoming more and more important and better over time. So again, it's a feature that I think people should be looking out for. And finally, and perhaps most importantly of all, because you're probably not going to get your new TV calibrated, is an out-of-the-box accuracy. If it's nice and accurate out of the box, you're going to get a good picture. And obviously, we do all this, test for all this in our reviews. So just read the review. You can see how accurate it is out of the box. But that is a key. And I've got to say, this year, in my experience, the manufacturers have got pretty good at delivering TVs with good out of the box accuracy.
I think you're wrong. I want televisions with a Dixon setting. I want the orangest people you've ever seen.
There's plenty of reviewers out there that like that kind of image as well. Yeah, you could go and read their work.
Possibly comment.
Right, so let's move on swiftly. That article is up on the homepage if you're interested in having a look at that. And if you've got any feedback yourselves on things that you think are important or are going to be important to you, then add them to the thread there, and we'll see what interesting things you can come up with. Just to wrap up here, in terms of the AV side of things, we've got 2 recent reviews talking about the latest and greatest, and then looking at something which is really interesting but definitely firmly in the 1080p world, and I think I'll go with that one first, which is the Optoma HD91 Plus DLP LED projector. Like I say, it's a 1080p projector. The real plus point here is that it uses an LED light source, and this is a plus model, so what they've done is actually up the brightness level of the LEDs, because I think you looked at the first one, Steve, the first HD91, and it wasn't a dim projector in any way, but it could have done to be a little bit brighter. Yeah,
it was bright enough for 2D watching, watching 2D content, and obviously the fact that both you and I have, pitch black rooms helps a bit, but where it struggled a little bit was with 3D, because obviously you need additional brightness for 3D, and it didn't really have enough kick there. But I think for the majority of use, it was fine, and obviously being an LED projector, it doesn't dim as much as a bulb does. It over the length of its over a long period of time, you'll probably find that it's brighter than the average bulb projector, which will dim significantly within 500 to 1,000 hours of its life.
Well, it's quite interesting because obviously I've got an X700 here at the moment, which is still our reference point for the last couple of years, I think it has been. And obviously I had that side by side, and I think the JVC's got about 100 hours on it now, and this HD91 Plus had about 40 hours on. And I've got to say, running them side by side, they looked about the same brightness. The thing is, like you say, if I did that test again in 6 months' time, the Optoma would probably still be about the same brightness, and there would be a noticeable dimming on the JVC. And that's the advantage with this technology. The other advantage is, with projectors, people don't tend to get them calibrated that often because it's a bulb technology, and bulbs, as they age, they tend to drift, and it's from the bulb that makes up the colour, which is why there's usually a lot of yellow and green energy and very little red energy from a bulb, and it's why they use filters and so on with projectors to try and balance that light output. And of course, as it ages, the colour shifts. It changes its tone from the bulb, and you need to recalibrate to get it back. And of course, it's getting dimmer and all the rest of it as it ages, that bulb. So should you be spending £300 getting it recalibrate, and I'm assuming that is still the cost for a projector calibration, guys. I don't
200, 250 depending on.
Right, so it's still a lot of money to have your projector recalibrated. The beauty of the HD91 Plus with its LED light source is that you pay that, and it's going to last 12 months, 18 months before it needs looking at again, I would imagine. It's very much like an LED LCD TV where it's not going to drift significantly over that length of time, which is a big plus point. The elephant in the room, though, is a 1080p projector. And as I say in the review, though, and what we've just talked about there with the TVs and what your next TVs must have and all the rest of it, should you be upgrading to 4K at this moment in time? You know, what are the big advantages of doing that? Now, when you're talking about projectors, you're talking about big screen sizes, so you're going to get the benefits of 4K, and it's going to be more obvious on a 110 inch projected image than it is on a 65-inch TV. However, there's still a lack of content, which you've already alluded to, Steve, and up until recently, getting applications like Netflix and Amazon with 4K, those apps were TV only, and they were only included in the TVs. Now that we've got the Fire TV coming along, it kind of opens that out for owners and so on. But still, there's a lack of content. So do you make the jump to 4K at the minute, or do you stay with 1080p and get something like this that has new technology, new lamp technology, which is LED lighting? It's going to be a difficult one, and I deliberately said in the review, because I didn't want to get drawn on it, it's going to be a personal choice, because it's quite difficult, isn't it, Mark? I mean, you know, if I asked you the question, which way would you go?
What, laser or cheapest 4K projector?
No, we didn't mention laser at any point. It's LED.
Sorry, LED.
That's another subject.
I'm getting really carried away there. Yeah, sorry, LED or the cheapest 4K available. What's the cheapest 4K Sony one? It's
about $5,000 at the minute.
$2,000's a lot of money, isn't it? I mean, that might just put it out of people's ballpark anyway. God, that's difficult.
It is. It's a difficult one, and it's.
I don't know. I don't know. I think I would be more tend towards go 4K, but then I don't know. No, I don't know. You can't answer that one really.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be relying on upscaling a lot of the time, because you know your content is going to be Blu-ray at the best for another 12 months. I'd imagine.
I guess if you're considering future-proofing for sort of external sources going forwards, though, I'd tend to want something that could accept a 4K signal. Okay.
Ed, what about you? If you were given the choice,
I don't know. As I say, there's enough caveats to the purchasing of a television at the moment. My honest, admittedly, I've always got other areas where I'd be more content to spend out. It's not like I have.
No. At this moment in time, you're not allowed to spend on. In this hypothetical case, you're not an audio fan. This is strictly video.
Well, again, just based on the fact that I would very rarely have the sum of money together, I'd probably have to go nod to the future and accept that there would be limited 4K options, but I'd be looking to get several years out of the projector. So just on the hope that there'd be an upward swing to there being more content for it across the sort of later years of its lifespan.
Interesting. Steve?
Well, whilst I was very impressed with the HD91 when I reviewed it when it first came out, which was about over a year ago, wasn't it? Well over a year ago. I was impressed that they'd managed to produce an LED projector at that price point, given the ones we'd seen prior to that were about 15 to 20 grand.
Oh yeah, mega expensive. And don't confuse LED with the office LED projectors. Don't confuse that, people, because we're talking about home cinema based, so it has to hit a certain performance point.
But if my budget was around that kind of price point, so we're talking about sort of 3 to 4 grand, I don't think it's a big jump to go to the 4K Sony, in honest, because that's over 5 grand. It's a big difference in price, nearly twice as much. I'd probably be more inclined personally to go for the JVC X5000, which is a similar price point, but does give you certain aspects that you can benefit from with upcoming 4K content like Blu-ray.
Yeah,
because you've got things like the HDMI inputs, slightly wider color space. You've got HDR support. Yeah. You can do not full 4K, but you can still benefit from 4K with the eShift. So that would be my personal preference.
Yeah, and that's exactly what my answer would have been as well, if it was my money. But hats off to Optoma. They have brought the price of this technology down. It's still 1080p. The reason it's still a 1080p is it's a DLP-based projector, and DLP has no future roadmap at this moment in time in terms of consumer for 4K at the moment. Certainly, Texas Instruments have not made any noise. Maybe we'll hear something at CES, but up till now, there doesn't seem to be any way forward at this moment in time when it comes to 4K chips, as far as I understand it. Commercially, yes, but not consumer-wise. So that's why it's kind of stuck there at 1080p. But cracking machine, but the one downside, unfortunately, is the black levels. It would have been a stonking machine if it had good black levels. Unfortunately, it's mediocre. If you're using it in a room with white walls, white ceiling, which is going to have a raised light level, floor level anyway, you'd get away with it, because if you put a JVC in that type of room, you're going to miss all the benefits of having the really low black levels and shadow detail anyway. So they're a bit more level playing field then, isn't it, Steve? But if you're looking for a home cinema base thing, then the black levels are not great, and it lets it down because everything else I thought was really, really good, especially the lens at that price point, nice and sharp, and motion on DLP has always been a strong point. Absolutely,
yeah, and by virtue of that, so 3D is always very good on if you're still a 3D fan, and it's a little bit brighter than the one I reviewed, which is probably good. You can
interestingly, right, they made this update to this projector, sent it for review, and then didn't have any 3D emitter or glasses.
Yeah.
So that kind of tells you everything you need to know about what manufacturers think about 3D. And it's been the same for most of the TVs this year, isn't it? I mean, certainly the TVs I've had. Mark, you the same? Have you been getting glasses?
There's only one TV that came with 3D glasses all year.
Yeah. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the manufacturer... Like we predicted a few years ago, it's a feature that's on the TV. Some people will use it, some people won't, unfortunately. So anyway, that's the Optoma review. It's up on the homepage. And Steve, your review coming up later this week is of a new Philips TV, and it's a 4K one.
Yeah, 4K. It's a 50 PUT 6400, so 50-inch Ultra HD 4K TV, and you can get it in, I think it's in Argos for 599 quid. So who'd have thought? I mean, that's how much prices have dropped already in terms of 4K. You're looking at 50-inch 4K TVs for like 500-600 quid. That's really quite a significant price drop, and a good little performer too. Going through that list, it doesn't hit all the points that we mentioned, but you're not expecting a TV that's £600 to do that. I mean, clearly at the moment the TVs that do all of those things are the high-end flagship models. So, for example, Philips' new 9600, when that comes out very soon, that will tick all the boxes. But this is aimed at people who want maybe just want to dip their toes in the 4K waters, try it out for themselves. Looking to get a TV, but don't want to blow a load of money or have a limited budget, but still want to get some 4K content going. Then this is a great choice, and you can't argue with $599 as a price. It is pretty cheap, and you're getting good performance, good out of the box performance as well, which is important.
Yeah, it just shows you. I mean, it was only 2 months or 3 months ago that I gave a Best Buy to the 680 from Panasonic,
799,
and that was almost 800 quid. So yeah, it's another £300 drop there in terms of prices. So only thing is, Android TV, did you have any issues with it?
Yeah, Android TV. Now I think this is the same story that we've seen with Sony. They're just not putting enough processing power. This has got a dual-core processor, and it's just not enough to run Android TV. And for the first time, up until now, I had a few problems with Sony, but the last Philips I had actually seemed quite stable. But this time I had a crash on Android, and I had to unplug the TV and plug it back in again. It just completely crashed on me. And I'm pretty sure that was directly related to the Android system, because I was in it at the time. And that, unfortunately, that's a familiar story that I certainly have been looking at feedback threads on the forums, particularly the people that have owned, because a lot of the Philips have only just started coming out, so there's been more Sony sold up to this point, and there's some horror stories in terms of the reliability and stability of Android TV. Unfortunately, it just looks as though they're not putting enough processing power on these TVs to handle the platform, which is a shame, because it is actually quite a good platform. I do like the platform inherently. I think it's quite good.
It's an interesting point you make there, Steve, because I'm going to go to our Android expert here, Mark. Mark, these little media boxes, you seem to don't have any issues with them running and so on. So, I mean, I'm assuming that they have better processors than the TVs then.
They're not running Android 5.1.
Right, so that's what the difference is then.
Yeah, I've only got one that's doing that, which is the Shield TV, which has got processing power to spare and 3 gigabytes of RAM, so it can handle anything. So it's as smooth as putty on there. But I'm sorry, I tell a lie. I've had one box from a Chinese person that's 5.1, and it's so bad that I can't even review it. It's just it crashes the minute you put it on. And
you do know that having let that slip, people are going to demand that you.
I will expose it. Yes, I will expose it. I can't remember what it's called.
Shoeing. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure obviously the requirements for these platforms are different to that of Android mobile devices. But there are 2 Android phones in this household for long and boring reasons. Well, 3 if you count my wife's. But my Nexus 6 has recently ticked over to Android 6. Sorry, Nexus 5 has recently ticked over to Android 6. And to be honest, all the way through its updates, it's not an especially powerful phone. It's never really shown any difference in its fundamental behaviour. If you strip all the crap off Android, it doesn't seem to be.
Oh no, yeah, it's lightweight
significant.
But I think the problem is that the TV manufacturers have got to install everything else in as an app. So, the TV guide, the TV video processing, everything has got to work as an app. And I think they've just not quite overcome that challenge yet.
It's just a lot of programming time, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, but it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see how that platform develops, because it was only a couple of years ago that they were all going to have Google TV, and that fell flat in its face. It'd be interesting to see if Android TV has any legs, and if it does, because there are the developers there, and there's the potential there. The same as with the open Firefox system on Panasonic's TVs. That it's open so people can develop, and it'll be interesting to see if that's taken advantage of and what comes or doesn't come. But anyway, work needing to be done on the smart TV side. That review will be up later in the week, so make sure you check it out. It's a Philips 50 PUT 6400. And before we finish on hardware this week, we're going to go Ed, because you managed to make it along to the podcast this week, so it'd be cruel not to let him talk. So Ed, one of the questions that has been asked, this was a little while ago, but we're getting round to answering it hopefully now, is what's the best way to listen to music on the move? Is it a phone and a DAC combo with a headphone amp, or a specialist music player? Well,
this is where it's an interesting one, this, because I missed the podcast last week. As I was in London. I have a life outside of AVForums, albeit a small and pathetic one. And I travelled down on the train and the tube with the aforementioned Nexus 5 and the Cord Mojo, for which the review is up on the site currently. So it's been quite well viewed. We were quite pleasantly surprised. In every sense, the sound quality that combination produces is the equal of any portable audio player I've had my hands on for review, or at shows, or listening to other people's samples and so on and so forth. The Mojo is genuinely state of the art, and it's not the only product of its type out there. We reviewed the Oppo HA2 a little bit of time ago. Steve and I have conversed. He still very much prefers the Oppo in terms of just the way it looks and feels, and the rest of it. The thing is that after a day of taking a phone with a block hanging off the bottom of it on a USB cable in and out of pockets and the like, all of a sudden my thoughts on this have sort of started to swing back towards the dedicated audio players. The Sony ZX2 went through the review process at the same time. Now that's £950. For that you get 128 gigs on board, and the option to expand it a bit further. If we take the sort of prices of top-line Android smartphones as being perhaps the better sort of match for this sort of requirement, all in all, with a Mojo and sort of additional storage, you're looking at about the same price. And in sonic terms, I will reiterate that I think the Mojo is a truly extraordinary piece of equipment. But if I was still commuting every single day, I'd be looking at trying to swallow the cost and have an audio player to run alongside. It's just little things. Just the Sony, as I say, the Sony is a more sort of streamlined device because it's not got anything hanging off it. The battery life, I don't believe for a second it could get anywhere near the claimed 33 hours. I think that's the same way that they quote MPG figures on cars. You could probably do it if you listen to it at notch 1 on the volume control on loop, but it's still comfortably better than the phone is going to be under those circumstances. Yeah, I just found that there is still a pretty pertinent case for the standalone audio player. As it is, where I only commute sort of once or twice a month, then the DAC comes into its own, and being able to use it with the laptop and test with other devices, the Mojo really does have some strengths. But I was all set to say that the Sony is a pleasant sort of curiosity, but just one day of commuting again sort of reiterated that there is a lot more sense to it.
Okay, cool. Well, that's about all the time we have for hardware this week. But if you've got any questions regarding music on the move, then ask them away in the podcast thread in the podcast forum, and I'm sure Ed will jump in there and answer any of the questions. Or you can tweet us at AVForums with any questions, any Ask the Idiots questions, that kind of thing, and we'll look at them going forward. So it's time for movie news when we come back. So, unusually this week we're not trying to fill Any space. We've had plenty to talk about. Movie news, you didn't go to the cinema this week because you went to see Spectre on Monday.
Yeah.
But what's opening on Friday?
On Friday, we've got Brooklyn, which is a new film written by Nick Hornby, starring Saoirse Ronan, about a young Irish girl who emigrates to the States and dealing with her feelings and growing up and missing her home country and trying to adapt to a new country and basically falling in love with a guy in America and falling in love with a guy in Ireland and then having to make a choice. But looks quite good and was very well received by Cassandra, who did the review. We also have this week opening Kill Your Friends, which is an adaptation of a book that I've read, actually, and it's kind of like an English version of American Psycho. It is very funny, but very blackly comic. Stars Nicholas Hoult, and I quite fancy that. And also opening this weekend is Burnt, which is a film about a chef starring Bradley Cooper, Sienna Miller, and looked quite interesting in the trailers, and I'll probably end up going to see that as well because my girlfriend is a chef and therefore quite likes watching films about movies about food, basically. Hopefully it portrays, I'm sure Mark can comment on this, it portrays kitchens in a more realistic fashion, i.e. places full of stress and trouble and no fun at all.
Was there not one recently very
Chef.
similar?
You're thinking of Chef, yeah.
Chef was good.
They tend to come around, don't they? Like movies that are very close to the same sort of subject matter.
Yeah. This is, I think this is based upon Anthony Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential, which I've read,
How is it?
which is a good laugh. Worth a read it's very funny. It's that kind of Bradley Cooper's character was a high-flying chef, Michelin-starred chef in Paris who basically burns out and then has to sort of rebuild his career in London. But it looks like it'd be fun, so I'll probably go and see that as well if I get a chance.
Okay. Blu-ray wise, what's coming up this week on Blu-ray?
On Blu-ray this week we have Slow West, which is a Western starring Michael Fassbender. Haven't seen it, although I have read good things about it, and apparently it's very good. Also,
it's not the name of
week,
Kim and Kanye's next child, then. North, Slow, Orange. They don't use normal names. Sorry, I digress. On you go. On you va.
Also opening, being released this week is Terminator Genisys, which I saw at the cinema and, much to my surprise, rather enjoyed. It's got an Atmos soundtrack, so that's good news if you're Atmos.
Oh, well, I mean, it doesn't need to be a good film, does it? As long as it's got Atmos.
No, that means Wither's going to buy it whatever happens.
Yep.
It could have been Arnie sat there in a chair reading a novel for 2 hours, but if there was an Atmos soundtrack, you'd be obligated to buy it.
No, that's not necessarily true. I am not buying Pixels, and that's got an Atmos soundtrack.
Oh, so you've decided now that you will not own every Atmos film?
I've drawn a line in the sand, and over which Pixels will not be crossing.
Oh, right.
There's no way I'm buying that. I hate Adam Sandler with every fibre of my being, and I couldn't bring myself to buy it. But I've got pretty much everything else.
By the way, Steve, I need a review of Pixels in Atmos.
So that's what's coming out this week on Blu-ray.
Okay, so the reason you didn't go to the cinema at the weekend was because last Monday you went to see Spectre. News is that it is the new box office record holder in the UK.
Yep, it's pulled in, I think it was 47 million in its first 7 days, which is more than Skyfall did, the previous record holder. So open to very big business in the UK. I think kind of expected that.
Surprising given how mixed the actual reviews were on this. That it's pulled in that type of money, because I think Skyfall got really, really good reviews and there was that whole momentum behind it, so I'm quite surprised that Spectre's managed that.
I think part of it was the Skyfall effect, that there's been a lot of pent up demand for this film post Skyfall. It's been 3 years, isn't it? It's been 3 years, so there's been a lot of pent up demand, and I think people were going to go and see this film regardless of the reviews. People want to see it for themselves, and that's obviously paid off dividends as far as box office goes. It was 41.7 million it took in the UK and Ireland in the first 7 days, which is a hefty chunk of cash, and it bodes well for its rollout, because obviously it opened in the UK first, so it can roll out across the rest of the world, including obviously the US, and should do extremely well. Whether it will make $1 billion, which is what Skyfall made, is another question. Because, as you say, Phil, there was a kind of momentum about, it was a bit cool to be being British again, and the Olympics, and it kind of drove the whole film forward. Whether that will apply to Spectre, I don't know. But I think generally it's had good reviews. Most of the reviews I've read have been positive. I certainly enjoyed it, so I think it's going to do very well. And then it just becomes the big debate. Then becomes, is it going to be Craig's last or not? So I guess the record it's set this week will only last for another 7 weeks. and then it will get blown out of the water by Star Wars anyway. So it's largely
I was
at this point.
I was waiting until you mentioned that. I was thinking he's going to mention Star Wars at some point. It's
well, Star Wars is getting some of my money, and Spectre realistically isn't. I mean, I don't know whether that's going to be the decider, whether it's going to be 17 quid either
that's
way.
That's going to make the difference.
Yeah,
I'm with you as well, Ed. So that's £34.
Yeah, it just keeps.
Yeah,
on,
well,
keeps on
I
climbing,
didn't get to go and see Spectre, so I might go this week though. So we'll wait and see.
So after all that talk, it was only me that went to go and see it again.
Yeah, well, actually, I decided I wasn't going to go and sit in a cinema for. I wanted to go outdoors.
Do you know how far my life has sunk? I read your lead article, Steve, about the 10 things your television needs, and I was thinking, do you know what? If I was writing this, I'd say, do try and get hold of the remote in the store and see how many times it can be dropped or immersed in squash before it stops working. Can you control the television from a tablet? Because you'll need to, because the remote has been dropped in squash. You know, how well does the television wipe down after being covered in biscuits?
Yeah, but that's just that point, Ed. I mean, the next one is when he gets his teeth and so on. It'll be
he's got teeth. Trust me on that.
It'll be chewing it through it next. That'll be the next thing.
It's like I was when we were at the launch for the Cord Mojo, and they were going, "You can drive a tank over it," and I felt like saying, "Yeah, but what happens if you leave it in a room full of 2-year-olds?" Tanks are fine. Tanks are very predictable. So yeah, if you are currently childless, and imagine that over the span of your next television that you may accrue a family, just it doesn't matter how well assembled you think it is, just make sure that it's indestructible.
So really we should be sending all our samples through to you, Ed, for build quality testing, really.
I've said it before, my son was sent a remote control by a manufacturer as a pre-production sample. I was instructed to just leave him with it for a week or two and see if it still worked at the end. That
did it?
It did, yes. So yeah, it's something to pay attention to. It's not very glamorous. It's a different sort of problem to making sure you've got the correct HDCP encoding, but it still matters. Trust me. When you can't turn it on because the remote's covered in drool, you'll care.
So anyway, that's Spectre.
Record-breaking Spectre, and frankly, orange juice free.
Yeah, there you go. Still at the cinema, so if you get the chance, and like I say, I might get the chance this week, so we'll wait and see. So to wrap up, this was when I looked at the trailer, Steve, and I saw it was set in the Victorian era. I was thinking, oh, what the hang? But then once I realised it was a one-off special, and it's because the series is set in the contemporary time period that we are in at the moment, with all the technology and all the rest of it. It'd be interesting to see Cumberbatch actually play it as it was intended to be in terms of the time setting that Holmes is intended to existed in. So it has a lot of promise, and the big thing here is that not only is it on BBC One on New Year's Day, it's also going to be in the cinema. Yeah,
it's going to get a cinema release on New Year's Day as well for one day, and most surprisingly, it's going to have a Dolby Atmos soundtrack. So that's I mean, I think I mentioned last week about Game of Thrones being the first TV series to be remixed in Dolby Atmos, but this will be the first, as far as I'm aware, the first, I guess we call it a TV movie or TV special that's been actually made with a Dolby Atmos soundtrack. So that's unusual in itself. And I think we discussed this on the previous podcast, but I'm kind of curious because I think having established Sherlock as a modern day story, and they've cleverly incorporated modern technology into it, they now have to go backwards and tell a similar story without those kind of things. So it'll be interesting whether they can achieve the same sense of, because it's a very dynamic show, isn't it, Sherlock? It's a lot happening, things popping up on screen. It's all very frenetic. Whether they can keep that kind of energy going. I don't know if it's Victorian or Edwardian, I can't remember now, but whenever Sherlock Holmes was originally set, then it'll be interesting to see whether they can do that. But I think it'll be fun.
That's what makes it interesting for me. Is like I say, like you've just said, and I said in the opening there, it's set in contemporary times, using contemporary technology like iPhones and all the rest of it, and text messages and emails and all this kind of thing, and the blogs written on a website and that kind of thing. Taking that back, that's what's interesting, to see how they're going to keep it dynamic and interesting, or if they're going to fall into what people expect of an old time Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, it'll also be interesting to see Cumberbatch playing it as a period Holmes as opposed to the modern day version. And also I saw the writers, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss were saying that if you read the actual novels, there are with the exception of Mrs. Hudson, there's hardly any female characters at all in them. Certainly no one with a serious or major role. And when they wrote the TV series, they deliberately created, I think her character is called Molly, who's the coroner. They created her character specifically for the TV series to create a female role, a more major female role, other than just Mrs. Hudson. So clearly, if they're going back to the Edwardian era, that they can't have that character, which means they've got to find some way of establishing female roles within the context of the original novel. So it'd be interesting to see how they do all those things.
A lot of ejaculation.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, a lot of ejaculation as well. That was a QI thing, but seemingly that's the wordage that was used at the time.
Yes, it is. Yeah. There's more. There's H.G. Wells was quite big on it as well. Quite a lot of ejaculation in his books as well.
So anyway, and I guess BBC Worldwide will have this out on Blu-ray in a couple of weeks after it's been shown.
Yeah, hopefully Blu-ray will also include the Atmos soundtrack, which would be great.
Yeah, because it won't be on BBC One in Atmos.
No, of course not. No.
And on that bombshell, that is everything for the podcast this week. My thanks to Steve Withers.
My mind rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work. I don't mean that last bit, Phil.
Mark Hodgkinson.
My 10 minutes are up.
You'll be lucky if it actually comes to 10 minutes. If I was to edit all your bits together.
I reckon maybe.
Actually, you have been especially quiet this week.
And Ed Selley.
It's not working.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark AVForums for latest reviews, news and video. And of course, we forgot to do it again this week. I promise next week. Steve, make a note of it now in the running order to go and check iTunes. If you leave us 5 stars, we'll mention you on the show. And please go and do that, because it helps us be present on the front page, and that means that more people can find the podcast and get involved. So please do that if you can. We'll be back again next Wednesday, so thanks for listening.